This is Todd. I wanted to have a quick video about improv and what you can learn from it to use at your gaming table. On Saturday, my wife and I went to an improv show in Manhattan. I live in New York City. It was sort of a spur-of-the-moment thing. We had dropped my daughter off at my sister-in-law's. She was going to spend the night, so we had afternoon to kill, afternoon, evening, and we were thinking about things to do. And there are several improv centers around town, Upright Citizens Brigade. For one, there's another one called The Pit, and there's a couple of other ones. So,
hi, this is Dennis James. I'm your host tonight for the Dennis James Theater.
We looked around and we saw, okay, here's some improv that's available, and it's at a pretty good time for us. So we thought, we haven't done that in a long time. Let's go. The show was, to be kind, unmemorable. I guess if I wanted to be brutally honest, as we talked about it afterwards on the street, it was bad. Just not funny. Just running jokes into the ground that just weren't good to begin with. Just not that great. But you know, more power to them. They're doing something that I couldn't do, and I think my only regret is spending the money on the tickets. If it had been something for free, like a class, I would have been not so upset about it. But having to spend money for it, it was sort of disappointing. But it reminded me of how improv as an activity can benefit a GM for running games. And I don't mean, and everyone will talk about it, it's obvious, is obviously the art of improvisation can greatly help you as a GM.
This is backstage of one of the greatest shows on earth, retail selling.
Whether it's just being able to create content on the fly, if your party has or doesn't have or goes off script, doesn't have an idea what's going on, goes off script, it does whatever, you can jump in with your improvised material and help out. Or maybe you ran out of material. They got ahead of where you thought they were going to be, and so then you can add material. That's a great skill, and I don't mean to imply that it shouldn't be something to take away from improv. But one of the things about what I wanted to talk about, it really isn't about improvisation, that part of the skill, but it's about the part of the improv show where the collaboration of the group comes into effect. So if you've never been to an improv show, and I'm not certain that they all work the same, but a lot of the ones that I've gone to have worked like this, is you have a crew, a group, maybe 10, 12 different people, and they'll take something from the audience, maybe a theme, a place, a thing, all the above, and then they'll take that and they'll start riffing off it in pairs, maybe there'll be 3 at one point, and then at certain intervals, as one set of people are building out a scene, then another set will just come in and turn the scene, take it over, do something else completely different, change it, twist it. Sometimes the players will just totally swap out and a whole new group of 2 or 3 will come in. Sometimes maybe 1 or 2 people will stay and someone else will go. And they do this and they keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, sharing the stage. Each team or each individual then hopefully over the course of the half-hour set, or whatever it ends up being, gets to input their own, whatever, their own humor, their own, inject their own ideas of how to push these scenes forward. But the thing is about it is no one of these people owns the scene. So to put it in terms of gaming terms, as the GM, a lot of times you have ownership of the story, my story, right? But when you're in an improv group, when you're doing these kind of exercises, nobody owns the story, because the story is totally going to change. If you're on the sidelines and you listen to the audience say hospital, and so you're going to go riff on a hospital, you can have all kinds of great ideas for, I have some really fun stuff for a hospital. I'm going to be a doctor, and this guy over here, I'm going to tell them they're a patient, and we're going to do this. But then by the time your turn comes around, you've gone from hospital to police station to right below a volcano to the surface of the moon, and you just have to roll with that, because all your ideas for the hospital, they may have been hilarious, but if it's moved on 3 places past the hospital, it will seem very obvious and very transparent if you try to turn it back to the hospital. That ship has sailed. You have to put that part behind you, and you have to keep your ear open to what the team is on now, and then try to come up with new ideas. And the same way, if you were a team that's on the stage and you're in the hospital and you have some great thing and you're running with it and you feel like, oh, I'm going to say this and this is going to be great, we're moving, you can get tapped on the shoulder at any time and told that your turn is up. and now it's somebody else's story, and you need to move off. Or someone else is going to come in, and maybe they don't tap you on the shoulder, they tap the other person on the shoulder, and they're going to turn the story into some other thing. So if you thought, oh yeah, I'm going to be the doctor and the patient, we're going to have this funny ha ha, and then suddenly it's all different. And the skill that you see them having to do is having to let go. They can't get too wrapped up in whose turn it is. They can't get too wrapped up into whose story it is, whose idea it is. They have to constantly interchange these ideas, interchange scenes, interchange characters that they're playing. And they have to totally just be free and open to not only letting go of something that they may have, but also accepting what other people are putting in and continually remaking that into a new whole that is funny. You hope. Right. And you could see these groups that I watched Saturday try to do this. They didn't do a particularly good job, but their hearts were in the right place. They were trying to do the right thing. And that is something that I think a lot of GMs can lose sight of when you end up thinking about in terms of your story as this thing that is super important. And then everything has to meld into your story, as opposed to looking at it like, hey, the story's going to change. The story, the things that I think are important, 2 or 3 sessions and the players aren't going to bite on it. They're not important. And let's just see what they're doing. Let's let them find the story with us, right? We'll all do it as a table. I'm not going to try to keep turning them back to a story that they seem clearly not interested in. I'm going to keep absorbing these ideas, and we can keep doing that, synthesizing a unique story, our own table story out of all these different groups. And I think when you start thinking like that, certain things become easier and certain things may become harder. It is harder to prep for when you don't know or you don't have a good grasp or you're trying to be free with the story goes. It's just something that's difficult to do. It's sort of that art you have to learn, and that's where the improvisation part of improv can come in. It is definitely a skill to be able to figure out how much story you want to prepare or pre-prepare, or how comfortable you are with what level of information you want to have on hand so that you're not preparing way down the road for a story that may not ever happen. Some people, they take to that to a fish out of water, and to a fish in water, and they just run off with it. Other people can be more difficult. It is a skill and a style, maybe not for everyone, that needs to be learned. The other aspect of it is it's a difficult thing to do, to learn to let go of these stories that you have, or not necessarily let go, but put it in a sense where it's not, and I've used this term before, where it's not precious, where you don't have your story on a pedestal that can't be touched, learning how to play more loosely with your story, or taking it down off the pedestal and letting it get roughed up. There's those different parts of GMing. One, the GM as the storyteller, is the person who wants to create something that to please the table, in the sense of, hey, this is going to be great, you guys are going to love it, to play through it. And then the GM as referee, who is sort of looking down over the world and adjudicating everything. And finding that balance that you like between the storyteller tendencies and the referee tendencies is something you have to find. But when watching the improv, what you see is they all want to tell stories. Each one of these actors has stories that they want to tell. But each of them understands that within the group, no one of them has supreme storytelling power. So they have to share that, and they have to be willing to, regardless of whether they like it or not. Oh, I'm doing the hospital, and this guy comes over and he changes it into a police station. I don't want to do a police station. Doesn't matter. You're in that moment, whether you want it to stay in the hospital scene or you want to switch the police off, the police station scene, or you want to switch something else. It doesn't matter. It's done. So you just have to take that and swallow down that bit of you that says, oh, I wish they wouldn't have done that, or I didn't appreciate that, or it doesn't fit what I want. And you have to go with it. And that's a skill I think that really can come in handy, because you oftentimes run into these tensions between the party maybe pulling one way, or individual players at the table pulling one way, and the GM trying to pull things in another way. And often that revolves around the story. And the more you can let that story be loose, the more you can let go of your personal ownership of the story and think of it more in terms of the group. And those tensions that come as to why your story isn't performing maybe the way you want it to, or happening the way you want it to, sort of go away, because it's not your story, it's the table story. And if the table wants to tell the story that's really about this other thing, then let go of the fact that you want them to go to the volcano of doom, and the fact that you're now going to the valley of desolation, and you run with that. And you run with it until something else happens, and then you can turn it, or somebody else will turn it. And that's where you get a real shared ownership of the space. And I've said this before, and I think maybe on Twitter, I probably said it. I think that story a lot of times is overrated in gaming. And I know people will point out and to their story times they may have read or Critical Role or those other ones, and they're great. But I would argue that probably the story, if you're just going to read the plot of something like Critical Role or pick your podcast of choice, or your live play, whatever, it's not that great. I think you put in terms of we're a novel. It's not that it's a great story. I think what it is it builds up in these great character moments and these things that can resonate with you and decisions that they're making and the progression of these characters. To me, it's not whatever the particular story was. It's the moments that you're building up towards with these characters and their relationships and everything that's going on that lead to these great bits of theater. And obviously as actors, they understand that. And they understand a lot about just how to deal with story that a lot of tables aren't going to have because they don't have actors who are educated in all the things. It's their livelihood. They're going to know how to turn these things into their favor and minimize a lot of things that will give tables of non-professional actor types maybe trouble. But I think the thing is that as a table, as a GM, I would worry less about trying to nail some vision of an amazing story and build in the kind of latitude to let those character moments build. And a lot of that you get because you give this space like an improv for different people to come in and shine on their own terms and turn the story and get the kind of moments that they want and build their characters. And then you will get those character moments that will come because the characters have been allowed to blossom. And I'm not saying that they can't blossom inside a more strict story. Of course they can. But I think what happens, and I saw this on Reddit, where someone had asked about this great emergent story they had about this cursed axe and stuff. But what the GM was trying to do is this player was leaving, or they wanted to switch characters. And so they wanted to kind of have this little arc with this character with the cursed axe. And that the GM had inserted the cursed axe, obviously, but how the player had embraced it and worked with this, totally that player's invention. They had totally made this thing and everybody really loved it. And so now he wanted to put that kind of character away and do something else. And so they wanted to kind of complete their arc with this character. And the GM was worried. How can I take this and shape it myself? And I think I mentioned in there, I said, why do you have to shape it at all? This is the player's story. Let them figure out how they're going to end it, how they're going to get it to the conclusion, right? And he was worried about, it's going to be anticlimactic. It's going to be... maybe it'll flop because I suppose it's anticlimactic too, but it'll just be anticlimactic in the timing. It'll be anticlimactic because as soon as he reveals himself to be a villain with this whole curse and everything, the party's just going to kill him right away. And it'll just, that'll be it. Or he'll kill a party member and that'll be a downer. But really one of the main ones was it's going to set back my story. It's going to do something with my story. And I think my response was, and I tried to be kind about it, was, if you're concerned about your story, you shouldn't be concerned at all. How this affects your story, you're the artist. Just use your imagination. You have this whole world in your hands. Just don't worry about your story. You remake the story. The story is the axe. This person came out with this emergent story. They tapped this other story on the shoulder and said, okay, we're going to do this thing about the cursed axe. That's the story, not this other thing you have. That can wait. That can whatever. I mean, if you need to work the axe into it, do something, you can come up with all kinds of things, but don't take this emergent story that's like a flower coming out of the gentle petals of a new spring bloom coming out of the earth and then crush it because you have to pave it over for this prefab story that you have. Your story can always come back later. You should never put the story above these other things. And I think, were they more comfortable? And the other thing with the improv, which this person didn't have, is confidence in these other players. Because one of the things that I pointed out and their worries was really all about them not having confidence in this player. Their concerns came down to this player is going to screw it up. Either they're going to screw it up like A, B, or C, and I don't want to let them screw up. But here's the thing. People are going to screw up. Not everything is gold. This person as a GM is going to screw up, may have probably screwed up already, will screw up in the future. I've screwed up in the past, present, and future all the time. They're going to screw up. And the only way you're going to learn, the only way you're going to get a feel for the game and progress and get better at it is to have those screw ups. You can't try to preventively get rid of them. And I think in improv, you just live on those screw ups. If you goof, if you say something, that just becomes the next punchline. you mean to say one thing you Freudian slip, then that's the turn of the scene and bam, it goes off the races. Those screw ups just become more fodder for you to use. It just becomes maybe one scene ends on a weird note because of that screw up, but it sets up the next scene. And that's that kind of flexibility, that kind of working with the group, that kind of thing. If we're all in it together and my story is not better than their stories, we're kind of that whole collaborative aspect to the table is maybe an aspect of improv that I don't get to see mentioned a lot. Everyone focuses on the improvisation part of the improv, but I think that working as a team, subsuming yourself to the team, being flexible in the team, and allowing the team to take ownership of stuff instead of worrying how it's going to affect your stuff, I think is a good skill to have, something that, to pick up on. I'm sure there are improv videos on YouTube. If you don't have a chance to go and watch improv, maybe there's an improv class you could take. I think that they're great for many reasons, but if there's one thing you can take away from this is next time you're looking at things like your story, or you're wondering how the PCs are going to mess up something, don't look at the mess ups as something that they're goofing up. Look at it all as opportunities. Look at them all as, how can we take this thing? How can we all grow? How can we all take ownership of this together and just turn it? And we'll meld everything together and we'll put it all in the Instant Pot and we'll pipe the pressure in and then we'll see what happens. The lessons that I saw from improv was as much about flexibility, group ownership, being able to be, in a sense, humble about the story, being able to let things go and go with the flow, that I think are very useful for a skill to have in your GM pocket. And the only way you're going to be able to develop it is just to try. And if things don't work out at first, if you don't get quite the results you want, instead of trying to force it, use it to build on to the next thing. Because there's always going to be a next thing. There's always going to be another session. There's always going to be another campaign. You're always going to have a chance to come back and do better. And that's how you grow. You can't possibly find a way to mathematically eliminate any kind of errors. You just have to do what you can with them and move on and have kind of a short memory of the ones that do badly, other than maybe what not to do again, but not to let it be on your mind. And I think when you watch the improv actors do their thing, you can see a lot of that. I think whether, as in my case, it ended up being a great show, just watching people be able to do that and be able to go out there and take their lumps and try and fail and just keep moving and moving and moving and trying and trying and trying, doing that as a team is something to watch. Even though ultimately, unfortunately, in my case on Saturday, it wasn't a great show.